So the president is going to abolish parts of the DOE, but the Department of Education was first put in by Jimmy Carter, and then a few years later, it was set in stone by Congress. So he can't shut it down because Congress established it. Okay, so only Congress can abolish it. However, he can trim the fat, and he's going to cut it by about 50% today, which is a great thing. But as Michaela was doing her homework on this, she said,
one of your producers,
yeah, one of our producers. She said, "Have you read the Department of Education Organization Act?" I'm like,
oh, obviously.
Of course I have, but tell me what you found. Listen to this. It is the intention. This is the founding document passed by Congress. It is the intention of Congress in the establishment of the Department of Education to protect the rights of state and local governments and public and private educational institutions. Now, just that. Are they operating within the law that was set by Congress?
Because I think you could convince me that that's a good idea.
Yeah, right.
Right? That sounds great.
Right. So let me read that again. The intention of Congress in the establishment of the Department of Education to protect the rights of state and local governments and public and private educational institutions in the area of educational policies and administration of programs, and to strengthen and improve the control of such governments and institutions over their own educational programs and policies. You hear the second half of that? To strengthen and improve the local and state administration and the control of their own educational programs and policies. That is not what the DOE is doing.
No.
Not even. Listen to the next line. The establishment of the Department of Education shall not increase the authority of the federal government over education or diminish the responsibility for education which is reserved to the states and the local school systems and other instrumentalities of the states. Oh, wait. This is not what the Department of Education is at all. So when they say, well, he can't abolish the Department of Ed, no, they abolished the Department of Ed. The Department of Ed isn't that.
Right.
Because like you just said, I wouldn't have necessarily a problem with that.
I'd have some questions, but
I wouldn't want it.
As a direction, protecting local rights over education is exactly kind of what I want.
Exactly right. B, no provision of a program administered by the secretary or any other officer of the department shall be construed to authorize the secretary or any such officer to exercise any direction, supervision, or control over the local curriculum, any program of instruction or administration or personnel of any educational institution, school, or school system, over any accrediting agency or association, or over the selection and content of library resources, textbooks, or other instructional materials by any educational institution or school system, except to the extent authorized by this law.
I mean, it seems there's all sorts of limitations on it.
Yeah. I mean, if you just go back to this, if he just reset it to this, do you know how many problems would go away?
I know. This is really common, too. We mentioned
grows,
the same thing
always.
with the Patriot Act.
Yep.
Like the guy who wrote the Patriot Act, there's a bunch of these things going on. They're like, I can't believe the Patriot Act would do this. And he's like, I wrote it. It's not supposed to do that. Like,
right.
That's not what it.
Right.
That's not what it's supposed to do
grows.
at all.
It always grows.
It always grows. It always
Yep.
evades
Morphs.
that initial.
Yep.
The limiting principles put on it by the law itself.
Which is amazing. When you know that to be true, and our founders knew that, it's amazing how long our Constitution and Bill of Rights has lasted.
Yeah.
The average Constitution's age in the history of the world, the average age of death of a Constitution is 17 years. We're coming up to 250 of our Declaration of Independence. 17 years. That's the average.
Wow.
We are so far out. For it to have lasted this long, knowing that this is what it always happens. They always morph and distort and erase the original founding ideas. Wow. That's impressive that we're still standing.
Yeah. And again, giant chunks of it are still standing. As we've pointed out many times, a lot of it isn't standing in other than it's just on paper. But that's the problem, right? We should be back to it and should be trying to focus our country on following it again.
Right. But
a little bit more closely. But I am glad that it still stands.
Me too.
It's just us and what is it? San Marino. There's one other weird country that has a very old constitution.
Isn't that an old like Chevy?
Yeah, it's the Chevy San Marino. Beautiful car.
Yeah, beautiful.
V8. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Here's the other thing that we need to talk about, and that is these judges. I'm going to get into Tesla on this in a second, and that's equally as important. But let me talk again about the justices and the judges on what is happening. The judge has ordered to restore USAID worker access and forbids the shutdown because it's likely against the Constitution. Well, that's not your job. The Obama-appointed judge trying to stop USAID shutdown donated thousands of dollars to the Democrats. The judge who blocked the key executive order has a long progressive activism history. I mean, we're having these judges get involved in everything. So what are judges supposed to do? What does the Constitution actually say? I want to take you to a football field. Glenn, don't do it. You're getting dicey. Don't go into sports now. Let's just take you out to a football field for your first second.
Uh-oh. Here we go. Prepare yourself. Gird your loins.
Is that like the grid loins?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Good job.
So let's say the ref is out on, and he decides that touchdown's worth 10 points. The clock should be kept running because I think so. It's most likely that it should be running right now. That is what's happening in our court system. That's judicial or referee activism. All right. They're just making stuff up. Judges that are stepping beyond their lane and making up the rules instead of just calling the game as written. That's what judges are supposed to do. They're supposed to look at things as written and then say, no, sorry, guys, that's the law. Not, you know what we should do? I should also be able to eat any kind of candy that I want. And you're a defendant. You need to bring me candy. Because that's what I want right now, okay? I'm fat. I've been sitting behind the bench for a long time. You can't even notice my fatness. I am the size of the bench. Just my upper torso's not. Okay? You can't do that. You don't do that. Now, it's important to realize judges aren't necessarily bad guys. They have a really, really tough job. And I don't like, I really feel bad when you're like, well, that's just a bad ruling. Well, maybe, but I wasn't in the courtroom. How many times have we done a story where we really want to bash the judge, but you weren't in the courtroom? You don't know what was said or what they know.
You talked about that when you did jury duty.
Yeah.
I remember, because I think from an outsider perspective, you can always come to something, but when you're there watching it every single day and you know the ins and outs,
different.
Sometimes it's different.
So when they start acting like lawmakers instead of interpreters of that law, then we have a problem. Like a judge should step in now on the Department of Education and say, sorry, gang, I read this section last night. That's not what's going on here. So the president... I recommend, I shouldn't, but if it comes into my courtroom, I'm going to show, that's the law. Not my opinion. I might love the department. I might be a full-fledged communist, but I'm here to uphold the law, and that's what Congress said it is, and that's not what it is. Now, sometimes there are problems that Congress needs to step in and say, you're out of here. Sometimes the judges, and it has happened in our history, and it's a very high bar, but I'm not sure. It should be a high bar like it is with impeachment of the president, but it shouldn't be off the table, okay? And here's why. If you go back to the Founding Fathers, They thought this through. It's kind of crazy. It's not like, hey, we're going to do a new constitution in Iceland. Tweet us your ideas. In Federalist 78, Alexander Hamilton says judges should not have life tenure. And if they do, only if they're on good behavior. Well, what does that mean? Well, he saw judges as the least dangerous branch because it doesn't control the purse strings, and it doesn't have an army. Okay, so he's like, if they're on good behavior, just let them go. Just let them go. But he also knew that judges weren't perfect. They do go rogue. So he knew that they would twist the Constitution and what they were doing into something that it's not, and that good behavior clause is not just for decoration. It's the lifeline of the people to stop the judges that have gone bad. Then in Federalist 81, Hamilton doubles down on this. Judges can be impeached if they abuse their power. How do they abuse their power? They step out of line of interpreting the law and start writing laws. And he's very clear. Congress has the muscle to check them. It's like giving the principal the power to fire a teacher who's, teaching kids the alphabet, backwards and mixed up. No, I appreciate it. We're not doing that, okay? We hired you to teach the alphabet. So has this ever been done? Has this ever been exercised? Yeah. I talked to a federal judge last night about this, and he's like, Glenn, Luster versus Georgia. And I'm like, oh, man, that's one of my favorite rulings. But I want to ask you to see how much you know about Luster versus Georgia. It's back in 1832. Supreme Court told Georgia they have to stop messing with the Cherokee Nation land. And I think they also said you can't go in and teach the Cherokee tribes Christianity. Okay. Georgia said, nah, we're going to do that anyway. Okay. Now, I am not a fan of the way the Native Americans were treated in history, and I'm not a fan of Andrew Jackson. But he wasn't a fan of the court. And he supposedly said, great, the judge has made his decision. Now let him figure out how to enforce it. Now, I don't like that. I don't like that. But that's what Federalist 81 was saying. They don't have purse strings. They don't have an army. They have an opinion. But if the other two branches are like, nah, we're going to do it anyway. Again, I don't like that. But that's only that can only apply to when the judges step out of their lane. When you're an activist judge, go ahead. You call your army. But when they're in their lane and they're saying, no, this is the law, this is how it's written, then you don't say, nah, you go ahead and try to enforce that. Because then it's a breakdown. But it's just as much of a breakdown if they legislate from the bench and we do nothing about it. The court doesn't have any tanks, doesn't have any cops. It relies on the other two branches. It's why that one's the weakest. It has no enforcement. It was never given any enforcement. The founders didn't want it to have any enforcement. Congress has the checkbook. The president has the tanks. The justices have their robes. So they lose. They're the weakest of them. Now, they're supposed to be able to check each other. So you're out of respect for what each arm is supposed to do. We do listen to the Supreme Court, but wait until you hear what else is in the Constitution that I bypassed. I didn't even know. That goes right to the judges and how important they are, according to the Constitution. Not the Supreme Court, these kinds of judges. Okay, so Jackson, when he says, go ahead, let them enforce it, that shows the limits of their power, but it also hints at the flip side. When judges overreach, they can stir up chaos, if no one's willing to listen. So here's where Article 3 of the Constitution comes in. And remember, Constitution, the rule book. The rule book for the courts. It sets up the Supreme Court. but it also gives Congress the power to create or even shut down the lower federal courts. They have no power over the Supreme Court. They cannot shut it down. They cannot affect it. But Congress can pass a law that says, you guys are done. So don't tell me that you can't impeach them. It's in the Constitution that is, and the Federalist Papers, that is critical. In case they start overstepping the bounds, you can impeach them, and we should. This is all a ploy. This is no different than quite honestly, the terrorism that is happening on our streets with Tesla. Okay, that's terrorism. This isn't terrorism. This is just a whole buttload of lies told by a bunch of people we're supposedly, able to trust because they wear a robe. Don't trust them. Why would you trust the justices when you don't trust the politicians? When you don't trust anybody in Washington? Why are these guys exempt? Okay, I'm not saying I don't want to sow seeds of discord with I believe in the Supreme Court. It's the best system that we have. But let's not throw our Constitution out for these guys who are sitting in the lower federal courts. Congress can say, hey, we don't need this court anymore. You're banned from ruling on that. Sorry, you're not talking about that anymore. It's a leash, and it's there for a reason. The Supreme Court is untouchable, and it's not above impeachment if the justices start playing king instead of judge. But their job is like a gardener. Their job is to keep trimming the hedges, keep the law neat and tidy. But if they start ripping out the whole garden and planting it with whatever they want, someone's got to fire them. And that is where we are with these lower federal court justices. According to the Constitution, Congress and the president are in charge.